Good evening and welcome back to Sports Talk ATL. I am Chase Earl, joined by Alex Lord. Nightmare scenario on Sunday afternoon. Ronald Acuña goes down with his second ACL, and I'm almost glad we kind of waited a couple days because I know people want to talk about immediate reactions and people want to talk about, oh, are we going to trade with people? And we'll get into that later in the show. But the initial reaction is just like sadness, right? Like beyond just the fact that you don't get to see this guy play, who is the biggest star, one of the biggest stars in the MLB. Sean Murphy said it perfectly. Like when you think about the Atlanta Braves, you think about Ronald Acuña. Like this is who kids dream up of being. He's Showtime. He's pay-per-view. This is why people drive 200, 300 miles that aren't from Atlanta. But if your team's playing for the Atlanta Braves or playing against the Atlanta Braves, or, you know, your team is the Atlanta Braves and you live 300 miles away, you go to see Ronald Acuña and you go to see Spencer Strider, and now both of them are out. So my initial reaction is just like, as far as the team is concerned, I'm actually not as concerned as maybe a lot of people are. I'm concerned more for his career and his well-being and mentally getting over this second injury and whether we're ever going to see the same version of Ronald Acuña because, you know, the injury thing, it's more than just, I mean, he's had two major surgeries right now, one on each knee, which is the second one's going to be way more difficult, both mentally and physically to overcome. And then beyond that, I mean, think about all the other injuries that he's dealt with. I mean, he's hyperextended that knee. He's had meniscus injuries. He's had other injuries. It's just like, how many blows can a guy take? And I don't want to bring up Michael Soroka because, you know, this guy did make it back and win an MVP. But you get to a certain point where you're like, wow, like this is more about the career of Ronald Acuña Jr. than it is about the 2024 Braves, in my opinion.
Yeah, he spoke a lot about the injury and how the first ACL injury and how it affected him mentally in that Players Tribune article he wrote, or it was released right before the season. And, you know, he kind of went through the process of how it put him down in the dumps. And it was a struggle, not only physically, but mentally to come back from that first ACL. And, you know, he kind of alluded to a big year coming up in 2024 where he wasn't a part of that World Series championship. And though he should be credited with it because he kept the team afloat prior to the ACL injury, there was no way the Braves would even make the playoffs without Ronald Acuña Jr. that year. So, you know, he spoke on how in his mind, he didn't feel like he helped the team, even though he very much did. And that 2024 was going to be the season where he helped propel his team to a World Series championship. So I don't know how your first mind as a person, a Braves fan, or even a Rivals fan, a Phillies fan, a Dodgers fan, goes to anything other than Ronald Acuña and what he's about to have to go through over the next 12 to 18 months mentally after have just gotten back from it. Like, there was probably a lot of doubt in not only, you know, Braves fans and other people's minds in that 2022 season where Ronald Acuña was a shell of himself. I'm sure he was doubting himself a little bit then too. And then he comes out last year. He puts together one of the most magical seasons individually we've ever seen in this sport. And then he comes off that mountainous high and he does it again. I don't know how you think about, who are the Braves going to trade for as a Phillies fan or a Dodgers fan, like, the Braves just got that easier to beat. That's almost inhumane. It's just a sport at the end of the day, and it sucks for Ronald Acuña, and it sucks for baseball. Like you said, one of the biggest talents this sport has to offer, kids at grassroots across the country, across the world, want to be Ronald Acuña Jr. So this doesn't just impact the Atlanta Braves, the MLB, it impacts the sport as a whole. I don't know how you can't get past that first and foremost.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like, and it's just sad to say, but it's almost like we're getting robbed of, I don't even want to, I mean, we are getting robbed of the prime years of Ronald Acuña. I mean, you go look at 2020, COVID, right? 2021, he tears his ACL. 2022, he's not quite the same player. 2023, we see what he is. He's the NL MVP. He's the best player in all of baseball. And then 2024, he tears his ACL. And who knows how he's going to come back in 2025 if it's going to take another long road to get back to that same level, if he ever gets back to that same level. So, yeah, I mean, it's deeper than just because, as we say all the time with these major injuries, you know, there's the physical side, which this is going to be infinitely more difficult physically to overcome, but it's going to be even more if you can go to double infinite infinity on what it's going to do to him mentally. Because as he said in that Players Tribune article, he was having self-doubt. And yes, I guarantee you that self-doubt was even greater in 2022. And then he finally gets back to the player that he's going to be. And then in 2024, he has a month or 2 months of the season, and he's going through the same thing. And who knows? I mean, by the time we're really talking about this, and you can think about this from a million different ways, because there's so many ways to discuss it. But, his future with the Atlanta Braves, those two club options are even no longer just guaranteed to get picked up. This $100 million deal that everyone was crapping on, right? We robbed them. Well, he might not even play out the entirety of this $100 million deal. It's a lot of it's dependent. So there's a million things, but more than anything, it's like I have trouble talking about all those other things. And yes, we are going to talk about them because I know a lot of you want to hear about them. And frankly, we are going to have to turn the page and start talking about them. But that initial reaction, the only thing I can think of, and I went back and read that Players Tribune article because it is sad. Like it's worth going back and reading, because I thought he did such a great job of giving us an insight into who he is as a person and humanizing himself, because he's not this flashy guy off the field. He struggled moving to America with the language barrier. He struggled with the ACL injury. He has highs and lows just like you or I, even though he was put on this earth to play baseball. And guess what? Injuries are stripping that away. And, frankly, there is like the odds are stacked against him now. Like, it's not just a guarantee. Like, I know we all believe in Ronald Acuña, and we've seen him be this superhuman, but I think that Players Tribune article says he's not superhuman. He's just put on this earth to play baseball, and you take that away, and mentally and physically and how you're going to be able to recover from this, there's no telling. Like, it is not a guarantee just because he did it once that it can happen again. And that is the scariest, saddest thought of all this. That's the one thing I can't get out of my mind for his sake. Whatever. The Braves, they'll figure this thing out. They figured it out in 2021. They'll figure the entire thing out no matter what happens, and we're going to be happy Braves fans. But this is his entire life. This is his dream, just being stripped away from him by things that he really can't control. Like, it's not his fault that his leg gets off because he's trying to steal a base. Like, that's who he is. And unfortunately, it sucks. Like it sucks. It really is. Like, I don't usually get too emotional about the game itself. Like, I don't really feel what the athletes are feeling, but it's impossible not to. It's impossible not to with him, because like you're watching a guy's dream kind of crash down on things that he cannot control, and it's not fair. Like, he doesn't deserve this.
Yeah, obviously he's a great kid. Nobody deserves this, to be quite frank. I think, to kind of end it optimistically, I think, all the points you said, everybody is saying them because they're obvious that, coming back from one is hard. Coming back from two is near impossible. I don't want to say the word impossible. But in my mind, you could think of it like this. If you were close to Acuña, or, you wanted to lift somebody's spirit, is, hey, man, you did it before. You're tougher than you think. You have overcome it. Not only did you overcome it and return to the player we all thought you could be, you almost exceeded those expectations in 2023. What we saw in 2023 was the absolute best version of Ronald Acuña Jr. And if you were his friend or his confidant and you had to tell him, it's like, hey, man, you've done it before. And it's going to be hard. It might be harder this time, but you've done it before and you can do it again. I think, Braves fans can take solace in that Ronald Acuña in the back of his mind goes, I've done it before. I can do it again.
Yeah, we'll get into some other parts of this after the break, but it really is one of those situations. It's the first time I've ever wanted to give an athlete just a hug. Like, I wish he cared enough about what I thought, because it's like, dude, I am so sorry, but we'll talk about more about this after the break.